right, thanks for tuning in to Lionheart Radio. I'm your host, Rick Alexander, founder of Lou Aviv in San Diego, California. I sometimes run really long distances for fun. Currently, just released my first book, Burn Your Couch, and if you guys haven't checked that out, it's at burnyourcouch.com. So I was recently on the Strength and Scotch podcast, and I had a good time, and today I am talking with Brandon Heavey, who is a CrossFit coach, and he is one of the co-hosts of the Strength and Scotch podcast. So Brandon, thanks for being on.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Rick. And I never run long distances for fun, so.
Right, I think we established that when I was on your show, and you guys were just looking at me wide-eyed.
It's pretty bananas. Actually, I did used to run back before I found strength and conditioning, and never the distances that you did, but working up to like half marathon or so. And after I found the barbell, I never looked back.
Okay, yeah, I think that's actually a common thing. Even people that get into CrossFit, it's like once they realize, like, hold on, there's a version of this that doesn't require me puking on my shoes, and all of a sudden they transition to weightlifting.
Yeah, totally.
So what was the impetus behind Strength and Scotch? Because it's a pretty unique name.
Sure. So my co-host Grant and we met at the CrossFit gym that I used to own. I owned a gym from about 2010 to 2014. I later sold it, but he was one of my early members, and we kind of became fast friends. Always hung out, and we're shooting the shit. And the thing is that I noticed through my business, through the gym, that a lot of people were coming in confused about nutrition and strength and conditioning, just because they're inundated with terrible information on social media or whatever. And so we decided that it might be fun to put together like a very non-stuffy way of educating people on science-based nutrition and strength and conditioning. And just be a casual, like two guys sitting around having a drink. So that was kind of where it came from.
Okay. Have you ever combined alcohol and working out?
I've seen it go down. I've seen the people doing like the drunk mile, and it doesn't appeal to me. So I'll combine them with talking about working out, but never when working out.
When I meant to bring this up on your show, and I totally forgot, when I was on deployment. My last deployment in Africa, we got stood down for a while and we had nothing going on. And one of the things we started doing was we called it the CrossFit drinking games. And the social media page got shut down pretty fast. But we did a shot of beer and a clean and jerk every minute on the minute for an hour. That was the workout.
Oh, man. That sounds terrible.
Yeah, brutal. So one of the reasons I wanted to have you on was to talk a little bit about the Strength and Scotch stuff. And then also because we are kind of approaching this open season with CrossFit. And I know that you used to own a CrossFit gym, and currently you do some coaching, nutrition coaching, CrossFit coaching, things like that. Specifically, I wanted to talk a little bit about how you would go about prioritizing and periodizing the programming throughout the year. So when you owned your gym, did you do the programming?
I did. It was toward the later part of my ownership. So initially, I kind of had another partner that was in charge of that. Over time, I started to geek out on it more and more, and then took control over that. So toward the end, I would say we were definitely more periodizing and building programs around people's priorities. In the beginning, it was much more like traditional early CrossFit stuff, where it was, do random stuff a lot.
Right. And I think honestly that random stuff, it gets you to a point, right? Like if you're deconditioned, it seems to work at first.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that, that's part of the power. And also the random stuff that they used to be doing, if you go back and look at like the main site workouts from, 2008, 2010, sometime around then, is a lot different than what they're doing these days. But you're right. So when somebody comes in, they haven't really been working out, and they pick up a barbell, they do some sprinting, it really doesn't matter what they do. I mean, they could do almost anything, and they're going to see some improvements in the way they look and the way they feel. But it's, what comes after that initial bump that's where, smart training really factors in.
Right. I don't want to shit on any one particular program right now, but I think that's one of the reasons that things like F45 are starting to get really popular, is because you go in there with a deconditioned population and you sweat and you move a bunch and you get some kind of fast results. And then, but I think eventually you run into that need to kind of start to periodize and build some kind of linear progression.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think, getting people early, I don't want to talk shit like you said on any, because I think that getting people early results is super powerful. Maybe the most powerful thing that you can give them early on to keep them motivated and get them interested. mean, it's this whole idea behind like how weightlifting has blown up just because people got early tastes of it in CrossFit. You know, you go back and you look at the early days of CrossFit, people were terrible at weightlifting, but now they're like world-class weightlifters in CrossFit, and it's all because of that same like dangle the carrot out in front of people principle.
Right. And so I guess when you started a program for your gym, how were you looking at the year then? Were there certain years or times of the year where you're traditionally looking at building strength, or kind of like what was your approach there?
Well, the thing that I had to start with was recognizing that my gym as a whole, as most CrossFit gyms are, the population there, what was important to them was CrossFit as a fitness program and not CrossFit as a sport. So, you know, CrossFit as a sport is people that want to compete and excel within the open, you know, maybe make a master's qualifier, maybe make regionals some point in time in their life. But, you know, training for that is a totally different can of worms than training for your CrossFit just as an exercise program to get fit, to get your sweat on, to feel a little bit better. And my gym population was the fit and healthy group. So while we did do some preparation for the open, largely what we were doing was just, you know, workout blocks that are helpful for people that are deconditioned and coming in. So mostly focused on building strength and, you know, not doing a ton of barbell cycling like you might see in the open, or, you know, doing a bunch of muscle ups or movements that weren't necessarily going to affect what they were hoping to get out of their fitness. Mm-hmm. And then, you know, that's kind of what brought me to this individualized design, was that I had a handful of clients at the gym that were interested in competing, in pursuing that. And what they need is different than what that general population needs. And ultimately, that realization and that train of thought is what led me to selling, you know, my stake and my wife and I's stake in the gym, and then doing what I'm doing now, which is just coaching people one-on-one.
Did you find it hard to keep the people that were in it for the lifestyle aspect, and then the people that got interested in competing, especially probably once they got a taste of it? Did you find it difficult to keep those two things separate?
In fact,
or maybe keep
totally.
them together? Yeah, okay.
I found it difficult to separate, and that was one of the problems that I had with CrossFit. Is I think that if you go back and you look, as the games started to take off, the messaging was unclear, and people were thinking that what they saw at the games was what CrossFit was and what it meant to get fit. But, you know, those people at the games it's not about being fit. It's about winning. It's about competing, which, you know, those are two different things. Mm-hmm. And so I found that as the popularity of the games exploded, more and more people would walk into my gym wanting to do these, you know, hero workouts, these benchmark workouts that weren't necessarily beneficial to them and where they were in their fitness journey. And it was kind of like the cart driving the, I don't remember how does that phrase go? The cart driving the carriage, or I don't know. But yeah. Basically, basically, you know, the people were trying to dictate their program, even though they didn't know, like they don't know what's important for them. They just saw what they saw what was on TV, and they wanted to do that, which, you know, wasn't necessarily healthy or beneficial to their goals.
Right. One of the things that seems like it would be difficult as well is, so I guess the competitive nature of CrossFit is one of the genius parts of it, because it gives you metrics, gives you measurements, and like the ability to see if your fitness is actually progressing. So when it comes to the actual lifestyle aspect, and you have these clients that are really, you know, you're trying to separate from the competitive group, what metrics did you find to be important in order to like kind of keep their head in the game and still keep that thing that CrossFit was originally meant to be?
For the general population group? Yeah, I mean, I think that it was more just about finding some metrics that would be valuable for general fitness. And that could be something like, you know, it could be running a 5K, or it could be like a 5-rep max back squat, or something of that nature, you know, something that's showing that they're building strength, something that shows that they're building their, you know, their endurance, and just those sort of markers, and not looking at like, you know, what's your max, you know, muscle ups, or what's your like max calories on an Airdyne in 10 seconds sort of thing, because those aren't necessarily correlated with just general fitness principles, though they may be much more valuable when evaluating an athlete for their capacity to perform within, the open or regionals.
Right. I think that was one of the reasons CrossFit drew a little bit of criticism early on, is like you kind of market it towards the general population and you say, the older population can be doing the same thing as your high school athletes. And then you have benchmarks like 30 muscle ups for time.
Right. And, then they'll say, well, you could scale anything. And so then you've got people that are doing some, like, they can't come close to doing a muscle up. They can barely hold their hands directly over their head, right? Maybe they're super kyphotic and they're just from sitting at a desk all day or whatever. And then they're modifying with, like, I don't know, jumping pull-ups and jumping dips. And you're really getting away from, like, the intention of what's behind that 30 muscle ups for time. So, I disagree entirely with this. Everything should just be scaled down. You have somebody new walking in, they should just be doing Fran with a, jumping pull-ups and a PVC. But you'll see that CrossFit is actually kind of, they recognize that recently, and they're kind of coming back on that. So you'll see, like, in the promotion of the opens in the past 2 years, they've had less fit people participating in the video feed for some of the open events. And so I think they recognize that and are acknowledging it in some way now.
Yeah, I've noticed that actually. They've started, like, posting, like, old ladies doing air squats to benches and stuff like that, and not just all the rich fronings.
Yeah.
It's actually really serendipitous that you bring up shoulder mobility, because just today I found out that I have 2 slap tears in each shoulder.
Oh, man. That sucks.
Yeah, it does. I'm not one of those people, though, that jumps on the injury bandwagon. Like, I think I heard somebody say it one time, but they were like, it's totally shitty to blame an external problem or an external thing on an internal problem, right? And it's like, you're a human. You get to decide what you do and what you don't do. So a lot of people are like, well, it's dangerous. And it's like, well, you're the one doing it. So if it seems dangerous and maybe your programming's fucked up or you're not ready for it, or.
Right. I mean, I think that's true for sure. But you've got people that are novices that have never worked out that walk into a CrossFit gym, and to some degree they expect to be supervised and, guided down the right path for them.
Sure.
And for a lot of gyms, they don't necessarily have a way to handle that group. They want to give you competitive programming. They want to be the competitive gym. But most of their population walking in is not competitive and just wants to get fit. So I think that what you say is true to a point. But when you're paying a high dollar amount for a fitness program, you do expect to be guided a little bit more and monitored a little bit more. And so I think that is a shortcoming in some gyms, and some gyms actually do a great job of it.
Yeah, sure. I think that probably comes just down to the owner, right, and the coach of that class. Yeah. Did you find it hard were there a lot of people that you had to temper to, like, pull back?
Sure. I would do my best to pull people back, but what I found is, again, and I just, the expression just came to me, putting the cart before the horse.
Oh, right.
So
I should have known that.
Going back to the cart before the horse, in my area, because I had my gym open in Southern California, there were a ton of gyms. I was in Pasadena, and that's a small town, even though it's a suburb of LA. And we had 8 gyms for a 300,000 person city, which is a ton of competition. So to some degree, we try to reach people and educate them as much as possible. But if we weren't doing enough hero workouts for them, then they would just move down the street to the other gym that was.
How did you deal with that?
Well, I mean, in part, we just work on education and explain why what we're doing is more valuable for what they're hoping to achieve. But it still doesn't land with everybody. And ultimately, that's, one of the things, like I said, that led me down the path to just moving in a direction where I'm working with people one-on-one, and I can work with people that understand that and acknowledge it and are willing to, do the work that's necessary to achieve what they want to achieve.
Right, sure. And so now you're kind of working with clients on the nutrition side of things?
Well, yeah, we do both nutrition and training programs for people. We actually also run some lab work and stuff too, which is pretty interesting to see how fucked up people can get based on, hormone levels and so forth. But my wife and I, we run this business. It's called Evidence-Based Athlete, and that's how we work with these individuals one-on-one and kind of, it's more of a high touch service and high coaching and, making sure people are moving correctly, making sure they're doing programs that are appropriate for their specific goals and eating properly and developing these periodized programs, like you said, if they do want to compete in the open, and we've worked with people that are, competed in the CrossFit Games, compete in open qualifiers, all that sort of stuff, then we design a program around that. I think it's interesting that there's been pushback within CrossFit on this idea that there should be seasons. And I thought it was just a kind of an interesting thing that you thought that was a good idea for us to chat about, because the common theme seems to be that you should just do CrossFit all the time without really defining what CrossFit means. Right. And then you'll be ready for when the open rolls around. Like, there's no need for doing periodization. And there was a recent article back in August that was published in the CrossFit Journal by a few, I think the Russells, if you're in the CrossFit know, that was talking about this exact thing, that it's not important to do periodization and to have seasons within your training. But I don't think that could be further from the truth. We've got all these professional sports, football, basketball, they all have an in-season and an off-season. They're all training differently within their in-season and within their off-season. And it's not like the football player, all they do to get better at their sport is play football, right? At the highest level, they're not even scrimmaging that much. They're mostly, working skills and doing strength and conditioning when they're out of season. Mm-hmm. And so that's really the sort of things that if you want to excel and compete within CrossFit, that you need to be thinking about for yourself.
Okay. So let's break that down a little bit. What would the off season in CrossFit look like? Now, if you're not a games athlete, it probably looks a lot like March, right? But
yeah, right.
But yeah, how would you periodize that?
Yeah, so totally. If you're not somebody that's going to be competitive, then just keep doing regular basic 6-week blocks that are building strength and building endurance and skill, and move on and don't worry about it. But the first thing that I think any program needs to do in March, after the open is over, in preparation for the next year's open, is to evaluate what happened for the open this past year for you. And so what a lot of people will see is, hey, there's 5 events in the open. I did 4 of them, and maybe I scored like in the top 1 to 200 in my region for those 4 events, but there was the 5th event, and I just shit the bed on that. So you got to sit down and reflect, like, what was it about that event that was problematic for you? It's hard to just say, do 5x5 squats when the open's over and you'll be set. You really do have to sit down and reflect what it was that were your shortcomings in the open, and then think about how to structure that into a training program, because those shortcomings are the things that you're going to need to be focusing on early, right after the season's over. Mm. And the season being the open, right? Off season being outside of the 5 weeks of the open.
Right. I think that's an interesting thing. I think as athletes, we don't do enough, which is reflect on the process, on what went right, what went wrong. We kind of typically think like, nope, it's time to go into a strength cycle, and just think maybe it's the actual, like, the bottom of your pull, like the first pull, that's actually your weakness. And so you're not spending enough time really on that specific area. Right.
Yeah, definitely. So you might see something where, like, maybe the workout you did terrible on had snatches in it. And so maybe technique is a major limiter for you in snatches. And that's something that you need to start off the season being very technique focused in your snatches. Maybe there was a workout that had a lot of toe to bar cycling, and you're just not very competent in that movement. Then that's something that you're going to need to work to build up volume on and make more aerobic in the muscle actions, so that you can support that higher volume of movement when the next open rolls around. Because I guarantee you there's going to be a shitload of toe to bar next year, and you're going to need to be able to do them. You can't hide behind that. And so that's the other thing that's really important, is not only assessing what happened this past year, but also looking forward a little bit. So let's say in this example that you scored like 200th place in your region, and your goal next year is to get top 100, to crack that. Well, one of the things you should be doing is looking at what was required of the people that were in the top 100 this past year in your region, and seeing the scores that they put up, and recognizing the volume of movements that were required for them to achieve those scores. So, maybe they had to do like 200 toe to bar in a workout. That means that, you can't go from training 30 toe to bar every other week to then doing 200 toe to bar in 1 week when the open rolls around and expect to perform optimally. You have to take a look at what volume of movements you think you're going to need in the open, and then that's going to be something that you're going to gradually accumulate up toward between the end of the season and the start of the next season. That'll be a big part of the off season, is building up the volume in those movements and also focusing on making those muscle actions aerobic. Because we've all been out there and done like a max set of pull-ups, and then your arms are just busted up and you can't do any more pull-ups, and that's a real problem. So building volume and doing it in a way where you're building muscle endurance and making the action aerobic means that you're going to be able to support a larger volume and rep count for that movement.
Yeah, that's actually a good point, and it seems like it would be obvious, but I don't really think that it is. I don't think many people think about it, which is looking at the actual volume it would take in order to be successful. Like we might say like, okay, I need to work on toes to bar, so we're going to do, we're going to put in like EMOMs of toes to bar, and we'll do 10 every minute on the minute for 12 minutes or whatever. And it's like, well, 120 toes to bar doesn't even really get you a ticket to the fucking show. So like,
right.
we don't really like.
Yeah, that's entirely true. People, I think they sort of submit to the fact that every year we don't know what's going to be in the open. Right. So then they're just like, fuck it, I'm going to train however I'm going to train and we'll see what happens. But we know the basic movements that are going to be there. Yep. They might, change the game and add a dumbbell in there, or, add a rower in there or something. Maybe next year we'll see an air bike. I don't know. But the point is that we know most of the movements, and we know roughly the volume of those movements that we're going to have to execute on a week by week basis. So evaluating those, learning from past mistakes, that's an excellent data source that we've got to dictate how we train for next season. And it's something that people generally don't pay attention to. But I can bet you that all of the top athletes that we see at the games that are working with coaches, which is almost all of them now, their coaches are looking at that, right? They're monitoring that for them. They're building programs based on those individuals' priorities. And that's what it takes to compete and win within CrossFit today. Didn't take that 10 years ago, but it takes that now.
Right. Yeah, I can't remember who I was talking to. I think it was Dr. Andy Galpin on our episode. But he's like, they say it's constantly varied, but like it's not. You're doing pull-ups.
Right.
You're cycling a barbell.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And you can't hide behind that stuff. So you know what you're bad at, and you just got to build a program around that. Like everybody's got a lifting buddy that at the CrossFit gym, right, where they work out, and they're like, oh, I always beat him at these kind of workouts, and he always beats me at those kind of workouts. Well, what are the workouts that he's beating you at, and why is he beating you at them? That needs to go into your training program, like if it's relevant for the open, as a part of your off-season like accumulation phase of training. So, at a basic level, we're looking to build strength and aerobic capacity for many months after the open ends, because those are two very important elements for succeeding. But if we're not refining our training based on our deficient skills and our ability to do certain movements aerobically, then we're leaving everything that's important on the table, basically.
Right. And that's one of the things that you pointed out, or that I wanted to point out that you said, which is like make that movement aerobic. Because like you mentioned the pull-ups, like you jump up, you do a max set of pull-ups. Largely that's probably going to be an anaerobic movement until you do it so often that your body's kind of efficiently using that oxygen throughout the movement.
Yeah, and you made a great point there about changing it into EMOM. So that's something that people might do. They might, let's say they finish up the open and they say that chest to bar pull-ups are a major challenge for me. Those were in the workout that I shit the bed in, and that's why was the chest to bar pull-ups and stringing them together. Well, okay, so as soon as the open's over, let's do a max set of chest to bar pull-ups unbroken and see what you get. If you get 15 of them, then we know that we need to work on that for you to excel. Then what we're going to do is break that up into EMOMs, and you're going to build that up over time. So we probably are going to do max sets of roughly 50% of your max. So if you're at 15, then maybe you're doing max sets of 7, and you're going to do that maybe on every couple of minutes on the minute sort of basis, and work to build up your capacity to increase that number over times. And, it's not, again, just like a black box, like, I know my weaknesses, I'm going to work on them, but you can continue to test these things over time, right? So in 1 month, you'll do your test, your EMOM, and then the next month, test your max set again. Did it go up? If it did, you're on the right track. If it didn't, then there's something else that's holding you back. And for pull-up, it could also be, like we talked about, overhead positioning or any number of other things that might be holding you back. And you need to investigate what's happening there and, work to improve it. So definitely finding those weaknesses and then building metrics around them and then testing them on a periodic basis over your off season is one of the keys to improving dramatically from year to year.
Right. Let's talk a little bit about length of progression. So I think probably common knowledge, at least from what I've heard, is that, it takes a lot longer to build strength than it does your engine. So a lot of times people will spend a good chunk of the year in these strength building cycles. And then typically, like, come December, they're going to just start putting in a bunch of just puke on your shoes, intense workouts, right? One of the things that I've seen, it tends to be an issue with that, is that the aerobic base isn't there and able to handle that intensity. And it's like people don't look at its intensity as this thing that's earned sometimes. And so they just layer it on top. And I think sometimes that can be problematic and cause injuries. But what is your take on kind of length of progression for these different things that you might be working on?
Right. So you hit it on the head that the aerobic piece is super important for CrossFit. It might be the most important thing when we consider the opens, because if you look at most of the years, we've had a couple or one max lift, but in general, we're not maxing out on lifts. And so, strength is important to a point, and then it's not. So, what is important is your ability to do these muscle actions aerobically, because you're going to be doing tons of cycling and need to not vomit in the middle of a workout or, blow up a certain muscle group so that they don't work anymore in the middle of a workout. So right off the bat, I think, building strength up to the point where it's not that important anymore for yourself, and then continuing to push on aerobic development is super important during the off season. And then, like you said, that provides the base of support for doing the more intense pieces, which you probably don't even need to touch really until we're talking, December timeframe. You might do a couple touches on it leading up, but by and large, you really don't need to get to that until you've built that nice base of support.
What time domain would you build your aerobic base to, per se?
Well, I think that it's important to start with longer intervals and then kind of work them down. So, doing training sessions that are in the 20 to 30 minute range is not a terrible place to begin in the beginning of the off season. And then by the time that we're working, say, up to December and January, you might want to be doing intervals that are aerobic in nature, meaning repeatable from a rep perspective or a time perspective, doing those maybe on a 5 to 7 minute time basis. So 5 minutes of something, then rest 5 minutes and 5 minutes of something. This is about the time of the year where you would want to be pushing the intensity of that aerobic piece. And then also adding in, we talk about energy systems here. So doing the anaerobic stuff, the glycolytic work, the stuff that makes you want to puke, then that's non-repeatable working training session. So if you did 2 minutes of that type of training, then you'd be resting 10 minutes between the next bout. And that's what it takes for you to recover fully and be able to train that specific energy system.
Mm. So you mentioned right there starting to kind of turn the volume up and get to those workouts that are more glycolytically demanding, so this is a good segue into your nutrition philosophy. So typical CrossFit, they definitely push paleo and that sort of a thing, which typically ends up being a little bit lower carb. But to me, it seems like a lot of CrossFit is very carb demanding. Right. What has been your experience? And then kind of what is your philosophy around nutrition for that?
Yeah, so I think that the first point is that it's usually about a month out from the Open when people decide to start taking their nutrition seriously to get in shape for the games or for the Opens. And that's probably the worst time of the year to take your nutrition seriously.
Why is that?
Because making a big shift in your nutrition right before you're trying to compete, like going into a caloric deficit right when you want to perform optimally is detrimental to performance, right? we want to, if you need to shed weight, that needs to happen prior in the off season. By the time we're a month out, you should be at your target weight, and not really working yourself at a caloric deficit, because you're going to need to fuel yourself adequately for those training bouts. But I totally agree. I think that a lot of times people that participate in CrossFit, not only the competitive people, but people that are doing it for fitness, will end up being, accidental low carbers. And that can get themselves into a little bit of trouble. Like I said, one of the things that we do is run lab work on our clients. And we see this a lot of times where hormones can get all wonky because they are doing these intense intense training, and not fueling themselves adequately for it. Glycolytic is a carb demanding energy system, and they're depriving their body of it, which can cause problems. And I know that we'll have people out there that are saying that you can do anything on keto, but that's just not been my experience to see that you can perform within CrossFit on a very, very low carb diet. So I think that, consuming a nice diet that's like got good quality proteins, good veggies, all that sort of stuff is important. But if you're in it for performance, then you're going to have to recognize that there's some carb dependent piece to it. You might have to supplement with, some like dextrose type product to help fuel those training bouts, recover from them, because especially during the open, you're going to be repeating them multiple times within a week to register your score and get your best score before, the week is up. Mm-hmm. So I don't know that that's really a comprehensive philosophy so much as, it's generally eating the way that everybody would consider well, that most people would consider well. A paleo template is fine. You just have to make sure that you're not accidentally going low carb, and that you're getting yourself enough fuel source, enough carb substrate to power your glycolytic activity. If you're not doing glycolytic stuff, then it doesn't matter. Like if you're just doing the 30-minute aerobic stuff we talked about, and you're doing some basic weight training, then the low carb stuff is powerful for, body composition change.
Right. Yeah, I completely agree. So that's also been my experience. I spent a good portion of time, like close to a year, in and out of ketosis, but essentially following it and measuring and checking. And my endurance went way up, right? My aerobic capacity, like being able to run my engine for 80 hours actually worked. Right. But my strength and my intensity just like totally nosedove. Like it was so hard to like even lift at like 80% of what I was used to.
Right. And, some people will cite studies about the benefit of keto, but the reality is that whatever studies we look at, there's very few that are evaluating people that are doing CrossFit. So you'll see research cited for supporting some person's conclusion or, what they want you to do. But at the end of the day, you have to always keep in mind that the training modality was almost likely not CrossFit. And that's an important factor in the way that you interpret that research and the outcomes from that research.
Sure. Yeah, I think I completely agree with you. I think that it's a tool, and people should utilize it as a tool, right? Because it teaches your body that upregulation of fat burning, and there's a lot of good things it can do for the metabolism. But yeah, as it applies to CrossFit, I think that's when it starts to be kind of a problem. So one thing I'm super excited to talk to you about is how you go about lab testing. We've never really talked about that on Lionheart Radio before. Tomorrow, I'm actually going to get some lab tests done for the first time. So it's
nice.
Yeah, it's interesting. So when you start working with an athlete, what labs are you looking at?
Well, it kind of depends on what they're presenting with. We don't just off the cuff run it, but if they're presenting with certain symptoms, and athletes in particular that are hard charging, it's interesting to look at their hormones, because a lot of times they can push those things to strange places. Other people that are applicable for running this hormone testing is like, people that have trouble losing fat, no matter if they're eating well and exercising well, and they seem to be doing everything right, but they're still not losing fat, or people that have energy issues throughout the day. Those are kind of the primary people that we're taking a look at when we run these labs. And the main one that we run for those individuals is called the Dutch test. It's a dried urine test. And so basically you get 5 sheets of paper in a special lab kit that gets mailed to your house, and you pee on that paper at 5 different times throughout the day. You mail it to the kit to the lab. They send me the results, and what it looks at is your sex hormones. So it looks at like a testosterone, estrogen, and the metabolites of those hormones. So we can see like the entire pathway of those hormones, starting at like DHEA and then working its way down to like testosterone and endpoints of that, and see the powerful thing about that is that you can see if your body is favoring, one pathway or another, and kind of make some adjustments based on that. And those could be supplementation, it could be training and lifestyle, it could be nutritional, but seeing the full pathway rather than just like the endpoint testosterone and estrogen level just gives you so much more information. It also looks at adrenal function. So like cortisol pattern throughout the day, because as humans, we are diurnal beings. So cortisol is supposed to be high in the morning. That helps wake us up and get going. And then it's supposed to decrease throughout the day, and then help us go to sleep at night with it being low. But what happens is that we find a way as humans to screw that up by, watching TV late at night, or by working in shifts, or, having crazy, hectic, stressful lives. All those things can screw up that pattern, which can not only affect performance in athletes, but it can also affect like long-term health. And so, we get to we get to look at that, and melatonin. And those are the main markers that are in that particular test. But again, we choose to run the test based on what's going on with that particular person. That just happens to be the one that we run most often.
Okay. So what is that company that you use?
It's called Precision Analytical.
Okay. That's cool.
And it's the Dutch test that they offer.
And you just you just pee on the same piece of paper throughout the day?
Yeah, well, it's 5 different pieces of paper, but yeah.
Oh, okay.
Just pee on that paper.
This soggy ass paper.
Yeah. Well, the reason that you're doing it at different times is so that you can get that cortisol pattern, right? So you'll do one right when you wake up, a couple hours after that, and then like afternoon and evening and before bed. And then those 5 samples will show us, did we have that peak in the morning and then decline throughout the rest of the day, or what was going on?
No.
And that,
in order to correct for some of these things, some of these adrenal deficiencies or overproductions, are you prescribing lifestyle changes? Are you prescribing foods? Like, how are you dealing with that?
Well, again, it depends on the exact presentation, but the foundation of the dysfunction is almost always lifestyle based. So there may be supplementation that we do as a near-term corrective piece to get somebody feeling better, but more than likely, if they've got a disrupted circadian rhythm, like we discussed, it's because they're not sleeping well, or because they're staying up late, right? And so you can't fix that with supplementation. You got to get them invested in why it's important to not stay up late, to go to bed on time, and to really focus on sleep hygiene. Because not only is that going to improve their health, but it's going to improve their performance. And when you get them bought in on that, and they see the effect it's got on their performance, then then you're set. But some people are harder than others to convince them of that.
Do you ever prescribe or kind of recommend more fat intake through nutrition in order to increase some of those hormones?
Yeah, sometimes. I mean, generally, I find that it's not, because you're alluding to the fact here that those hormones are starting from fats in the body.
Right.
And generally, though, I find that unless it's somebody that's on a crazy low-fat diet, that's typically not the driver of these problems. But in the CrossFit community, we generally don't have people that are on the low-fat diet. They're more paleo. Sure. They're usually on a higher fat diet. But in extreme cases of low-fat, sort of old school healthy diet, that certainly could be a driver.
So a hot topic right now is testosterone. And a lot of people are like the TRT and the testosterone replacement therapy, things like that. Is that something you recommend when you start seeing those low levels, or do you kind of refer to a professional? Because essentially those professionals are like they're just pushing juice, right? Like, you go to an anti-aging clinic, you could just tell them like, dude, I need testosterone, and you'll get it. So
yeah,
kind of
it's kind of like it's kind of like the recreation or the medical marijuana places out in California, right before it became legal there. Right. You could go there and get it. Didn't really matter what your symptoms were. Right. Yeah, totally.
Yeah, my buddy was like, dude, it's from a doctor. I'm like, dude, barely.
Right. Definitely.
Right.
So yeah, I do appreciate my scope of practice here. You know, I can't diagnose anything. I'm not a doctor. I can't treat or prescribe. So when I see something that's crazy out of bounds, then I may refer them to a doctor. More than often, we will try to make the lifestyle changes that are necessary to make improvements and then remeasure and see if we're trending in the right direction. If we're not, then maybe they have to go see a doctor. And ideally, it's somebody that's not just pushing the HRT, that's actually, you know, wants to understand what's going on. But I have seen cases where people really just don't seem to respond to anything, and the HRT has been very valuable to them. So, you know, I want to be careful not to just like belittle that treatment. But I do think that, like you said, it is way overused and can have bad side effects, you know. So I think that anytime we're taking a prescription or a supplement or anything, we should be aware that those things don't come without a cost. There's no free lunch in any of this stuff. And when we're making one level go up, we're often making some other level go down or something else go out of bounds. And we just need to appreciate that, understand that, and try to work the underlying causes, which are often not a deficiency in hormone replacement therapy, but in a deficiency in something else in your life.
Mm. Do you ever order the test and then you realize like, oh, you're coming in at like just over 2,500 there, bud?
Right. Yeah. I mean, we get people all over the mark here. So it's it's pretty wild to see those results. What labs are you running for yourself now?
So I'm trying to figure out the hormone side. I've had like a lot of people I guess make the recommendation or tell me that there's probably a good chance. I'm just having a hard time, one, responding to diet. Two, I think I might have a lot of food intolerances, so I'm going to do some allergy panels. But also, two, I think just through the course of having a really tough endurance year, I think that maybe I overran the engine a little bit. And so I'm trying to figure out, just get an idea of where I'm at hormonally, I guess. Yeah,
I think you said you ran some crazy number of ultras this year, right?
I ran 10, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that seems like a lot to me.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't be surprised to see that maybe you pushed a little hard and that's kind of driven some things into boundary regions or maybe, you know, out of range or something.
Yeah.
But certainly I think getting that insight would be very helpful. The food allergy thing is pretty interesting too. Are you going to see an allergist for that, or what tests are you running for that?
I'm going to like just a blood work lab essentially.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I was just curious because some of those tests are a little bit gimmicky.
Are they?
You know, a lot of the food we don't call them allergies. Like allergies are generally accepted and understood and straight up. But when we get into this idea of food sensitivities, there's a lot of gray areas, and most of the testing out there has not been validated scientifically. And there's been tons of things like case studies where you'll send 3 blood samples in taken at the exact same time and get dramatically different results from the same lab that's running these food sensitivity tests.
Really?
So you got to be careful about using that information. I think that, you know, it's pretty powerful for people you can recognize when you have symptoms due to food. So I think that's a great starting point is like, oh yeah, I've got, you know, GERD now. I've got, I feel like I want to shit my pants or something after lunch. What did I eat? And then trying to, you know, make judgments based on that, taking foods out and seeing if you feel better. But when it comes down to it, I found that there is one food sensitivity test that's been peer reviewed. It's been through peer reviewed research, and I feel pretty good about it. And it's from Cyrex is the lab.
Okay.
So if you do end up running food sensitivity testing, that's what I would recommend you check out.
Okay. And how does that work? They just send you something to pee on as well?
No, I wish. So for the food sensitivity, you have to give them a blood sample. So what ends up happening is for blood, you have to work with a doctor unless you're using like direct labs, which lets you order your own blood samples, your blood tests. And so they'll send you a couple of vials, and then you'll go in and like if direct labs, they'd send you a couple of vials, and then you'd go to a Quest location nearby, and then they'd fill them on and mail it back to the lab, and then you'd get the results later. Otherwise, if you're working with a doctor or somebody, then it'd just be how you run labs with that doctor.
Okay. Yeah, that's interesting. I recently started following a macro approach, specifically just because I never really had, and I was curious. And although I started, like, from a body composition starting to look better, I've felt like dog shit, and I feel like I haven't performed great. And when I look back, some of these more trendy diets in the last couple of years, like paleo and keto, have worked really well for me. And part of me is thinking, well, maybe that's because I've cut so much out when doing those things.
Yeah, it's possible. From a food sensitivity perspective, it's been shown that you can actually give yourself issues with foods. Like if you take them out for an extended period of time, then, for instance, lactose intolerance, we've seen that individuals that pull dairy out for an extended period can then induce lactose intolerance in themselves when they didn't exhibit it before. So, taking out any other foods, it's another reason why we see vegetarians, for instance, they pull out meat for a very long time, and maybe they try to eat it again, and they're like, oh, I get stomach upset when I eat meat. Well, their body has sort of downregulated the production of the enzymes that it takes to digest those proteins now. And that's caused the problem that they're having now, which is unfortunate for them because, there's great meats are excellent sources of protein. So, that's just kind of an interesting point. So if you've pulled out a lot of foods, that may be one of the contributors here. You may want to, again, kind of do an isolation diet, try to find the foods that are causing problems, take them out for a little while, and then like slowly reintroduce them one by one and see if you can build up your tolerance to them.
Yeah, that's an interesting thing. So, because I guess like the approach I've always thought is like, paleo is a good example. If you go paleo for 30 days, like a lot of people do the 30-day challenge, and then you reintroduce gluten, you're instantly like, oh my God, why do I feel so crappy? And a lot of people will say it's because it's magnifying that insensitivity that you have, right?
Yeah, so I mean that could be a case, but then again, we also have the circumstances there, and for 30 days, that's probably not long enough to really cause this issue. It's more like longer term withdrawal from a certain food. But on the other end of the spectrum is just what you discussed there, which is, well, I've been eating crappy and feeling crappy, but just not recognizing it. And now that I'm eating better and working out and doing whatever else, and I reintroduce shitty foods, now I feel like shit, and I recognize that that's how I used to feel all the time, but I didn't know it.
Right. Yeah, you just didn't know what good felt like, kind of.
Yeah. And, for you, it sounds like you've done well with keto and paleo, and we mentioned that paleo is often low carb. Some people genetically just don't do as well as others on carbohydrates. So, this macro approach that you're taking now, maybe higher in carbohydrate, and your body just has a hard time processing those. So
dealing with it.
Yeah. So that's something to consider.
Yeah, for sure. So you work mostly with or completely with online clients?
Yeah, we're totally online. We do the training programs. We do one-on-one nutrition coaching and the lab work stuff, or combine those factors for the certain individuals.
Okay. And do you take advanced clients only, or how are you kind of controlling some things like form and things like that?
Yeah. So when it comes to training, absolutely, we want people that have a background in lifting, or we will use different stimulus. So, if they don't have a background in lifting, but they seem like they're still a good client, because we interview all of our prospects to make sure they're a good fit for us and we're a good fit for them. And, there are other things, like we just have to get creative. Maybe barbell isn't the best approach for them because they can't squat, but that doesn't mean that we can't, give them a sandbag and have them do carries with it and still get them to do that with good form. So it kind of depends on what their goal is and where they are currently. If I get somebody that's never worked out before and they say, hey, I want to make CrossFit Games, then yeah, I'm probably going to pass on that person because it's not a good fit, right?
That's every dude that's ever gone to an intro class.
Yeah, totally. But if we get somebody that's hasn't worked out in years and is looking to drop some fat, then we might still take them on and just get away from the barbell or do something a little bit different in their training that could still stimulate fat loss, but that doesn't require that they're expert at certain movements.
Okay, cool. And so where can people find that?
If they want to check it out, it's evidencebasedathlete.com.
Okay, dope.
They can set up a free call with me there, and we can chat and see if, like I said, we're a good fit for them and they're a good fit for us. Because, what fun is it working with people that it's not a good fit for?
Right. Yeah, no, I've definitely interviewed a shitload of online coaches and stuff like that, and I definitely appreciate your kind of wholesome approach. So, I'll definitely say that people are listening to this. If you're looking to diagnose some of these or feel like you're coming up short in some areas, taking this wholesome approach with the lab work and looking at food and exercise and all of these things as one big pie instead of trying to incrementally follow a strength program here and then go do this nutrition program here. I definitely recommend trying to look at somebody that takes an approach that looks at the whole puzzle at one time. So moving on to the Lionheart Kicker, which is the final question we ask every guest. Based on advice, if you could give advice that we're guaranteed everybody in the world would hear it, they might not all follow it. In fact, they definitely probably won't because people are assholes. But they would definitely hear what you said. What would you tell people?
I think I have to, and maybe cheating a little bit, but I think I have to jump on to the point that you just alluded to, which I think is super powerful. And that is, whatever you're doing, if you're trying some diet, you're trying CrossFit, whatever it is, and you're trying to achieve a goal, fat loss or performance, take a step back and look at what you're doing, because it might not be, it's just a technique, right? And you need to understand the principles that make that technique work for the right person. So if you take a step back, you look at the principles that drive fat loss or drive performance and make sure that you're adhering to those on a basic level, then you will achieve what your goals are. And if you're just jumping from technique to technique, then you're very unlikely to ever achieve anything of value from your fitness.
Right. Yeah, I completely agree. It's difficult in a world, driven by like fast food and instant gratification, but that's
right.
Great advice.
Right. And 10 reasons that, keto or paleo or Orange Theory or whatever is the best, the article on Facebook that comes up on your feed. It's super distracting.
Yeah. Well, it's very enticing to want to skip the process, right? Like I've noticed this. I wrote about it a little bit in my book. It's like, like starting a business or whatever it is you want to do. You want to Google how to, and you want to read the first article that's going to tell you exactly how to do it, when you don't realize that like the struggle is the fucking process. Like you have to go through these things in order to know how to do it correctly or greatly, right?
Right. Absolutely. And again, that's another, great point is that it's not necessarily about the end point always. You got to sort of enjoy the journey, and the struggle is the process. So people should absolutely embrace that.
Yeah. Nothing
of value comes easy.
Right, absolutely.
Yeah.
So for people that are listening to this, outside of the coaching, if they just want to follow along with your journey, or like the things that you're saying, want to listen to the podcast, where can they do those things?
Podcast is available on iTunes. They can go to strengthandscotch.com if they want and check it out there too. But I just do a search on whatever app you use to listen to your podcasts and find us there. And, we try to give no nonsense, non-stuffy, scientifically validated information on training and nutrition there.
Yeah, for sure. And I was on it, episode 155, so go check it out.
Yeah, that's the best episode we've done.
Right. All right. This was a great episode. Brandon, thanks for joining me today.
Thank you.
Perfect. Thanks, guys. Thanks for listening to Lionheart Radio. I hope that the information from today's show will make you fitter, happier, and healthier. For the show notes of this episode and every episode, head to www.lionheartrad.io. Yep, just like Lionheart Radio. And please, if you have the time, head over to iTunes and give us a 5-star rating. It really helps us to know that we're on the right track in delivering you reliable information and value. As always, feedback is welcomed. If you have any comments on the show or like to suggest a guest, send me an email at rick@luavive.com. That's LUAVIVE.com. Thanks for your support, and we will see you next time.
Bitch, I feel good. Don't I look stupendous? My shine is so endless, and shit you can do to end this. Even when I'm dead, niggas still gon' bump that chip shit. Coke white, Escalade on cinches for you dipshit. So you won't forget this. Midwest nigga be the coldest. Cleveland is the